or about China. They're trying to divert people's attention from the real problem, which is that our economic problems are created right here in Washington, D.C. from a government that's too big, that spends too much, that regulates too much. I'm not an expert on the Federal Reserve, but that's sure something.
Washington Journal airs live every morning at 7 Eastern on C-SPAN. The House is gaveling in for legislative work. 5 bills are scheduled for today, including authorization for State Department programs in 2013.
Taken later. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass S-1959, the Haqqani Network Terrorist Designation Act of 2011, as amended.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
Senate 1959, an act to require a report on the designation of the Haqqani Network as a foreign terrorist organization and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Griffin, and the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Deutsch, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arkansas.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on S-1959 as amended, currently under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
I thank my Senate colleague, Mr. Burr of North Carolina, and Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Mr. Rogers of Michigan, for their work on this issue. This bill directs the Secretary of State to submit a report to Congress detailing whether the Haqqani Network meets the criteria for designation as a foreign terrorist organization according to current federal law. If the Secretary determines that the Haqqani Network does not meet the criteria, the Secretary shall provide a detailed justification as to which criteria have not been met. The bill also provides a sense of Congress that the Secretary of State should designate the network as a foreign terrorist organization. The Haqqani Network is an insurgent group fighting against U.S.-led NATO forces and the government of Afghanistan. Maulvi Jalaluddin Haqqani and his son lead the network, which is now based in Pakistan, but operates on both sides of the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. For about 2 years, the Pakistani government has sought to facilitate a compromise between the Haqqani Network and the government of Afghanistan. However, the network has close links with al-Qaeda and is believed to provide al-Qaeda operatives with safe haven in Haqqani-controlled areas. The Pakistani government is believed to be the only entity with the influence to bring the Haqqani Network to the negotiating table. The Obama administration has been considering formally designating the Haqqani Network as a foreign terrorist organization under U.S. law, but is yet to act. 7 Haqqani leaders have been under U.S. sanctions since 2008. And in 2011, Secretary Clinton designated Operational Commander Baharuddin Haqqani under Executive Order 13224, thereby blocking movement of his assets, but not those of the umbrella Haqqani Network. Since 2008, several attacks have been linked or attributed to the Haqqani Network. In addition to kidnappings of journalists and bombings of hotels and embassies, the Haqqani Network is blamed for the attacks on the U.S. Embassy and nearby NATO bases in Kabul in September 2011. U.S. Ambassador Ryan Crocker blamed the Haqqani Network for the 19-hour Kabul attack, which killed 4 police officers, 3 coalition soldiers, and 4 civilians. 24 more soldiers and civilians were injured. The Obama administration insists on negotiating with the Haqqani Network despite unsuccessful attempts in the past. Secretary Clinton has indicated that these negotiations may be necessary again in order to establish sustainable peace in Afghanistan. However, the Haqqani Network has been permitted to evade designation as a foreign terrorist organization. Congress's frustration with the Obama administration's overdue review of the Haqqani Network is clearly evidenced by this legislation. According to U.S. military commanders, the Haqqani Network is highly resilient and is one of the biggest threats to the U.S.-led NATO forces and the Afghan government in the current war in Afghanistan. This straightforward legislation simply directs the Secretary of State to analyze whether the Haqqani Network meets the standards for designation as a foreign terrorist organization under federal law and report those findings back to Congress. It also expresses the sense of Congress that the Haqqani Network should be designated as a foreign terrorist network. The bill does not, however, require that the President designate the Haqqani Network as a foreign terrorist organization. This is a carefully limited bill, and as I noted earlier, similar legislation was passed by the Senate without opposition. I urge my colleagues to support this bipartisan, bicameral legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. Gentleman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in cautious support of S. 1959, the Haqqani Network Terrorist Designation Act. Despite its name, this bill does not require the U.S. Department of State to formally designate the Haqqani Network a terrorist organization. Rather, it imposes a one-time reporting requirement on the State Department to explain whether the Haqqani Network meets the statutory requirements for that designation. More importantly, the bill preserves the authority of the State Department to make this determination without congressional interference. Let's be clear. The Haqqani Network is a dangerous organization and sworn enemy of the United States. From its base along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, the network of insurgents led by Jalaluddin Haqqani and his family has for years fought U.S. and allied forces in eastern Afghanistan. The Haqqanis are responsible for several high-profile acts of terror, including an attack on the United States Embassy on September 13, 2011, that left 16 Afghans dead. One tool out of many for fighting an organization like the Haqqani Network is to designate a group a terrorist organization under Section 219 of the Immigration and Nationality Act. Once a group receives that formal designation, the full weight of the federal government is brought to bear, including criminal penalties, for the provision of material support to the organization, restrictions on travel, and seizure of assets. Designating an organization a terrorist organization is often an appropriate tool when the circumstances are unambiguous. But the circumstances in eastern Afghanistan and northwest Pakistan are anything but ambiguous. The United States is engaged in delicate negotiations with the government of Pakistan as it prepares to draw down troops and end the war in Afghanistan. In just the last few weeks, our diplomatic corps has achieved the monumental task of reopening our lines of communication with the Pakistani government. It may be that in this context, there is a diplomatic or strategic benefit to holding back on the formal designation of the Haqqani Network as a terrorist organization, perhaps just for the time being. The State Department has already designated several individuals in the Haqqani Network as terrorists. If there is a reason that Secretary of State Clinton has not yet formally designated the entire network, then we ought to defer to her judgment. Still, a modest reporting requirement as to some of the legal reasoning behind that decision is a fair request. Even if the Haqqani Network meets the statutory criteria for designation as a foreign terrorist organization, even if that tool is available to us, Secretary Clinton will make that decision when she determines that it is useful and appropriate to do so. I thank the Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Arkansas.
I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Senate 1959 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative. Rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. What's next? For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask that the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 6018 as amended.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 6018, a bill to authorize appropriations for the Department of State for fiscal year 2013 and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Ross-Lehtinen, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Berman, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Florida.
I thank the Speaker, and I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on the bill H.R. 6018.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I thank the Speaker. I want to thank the ranking member and indeed all of the members on both sides of the aisle for all of the work that has gone into the drafting of this carefully targeted State Department authorization bill for fiscal year 2013. Despite significant efforts by the Committee on Foreign Affairs, the Department of State has been operating without legislative authority for nearly a decade. The last authorization bill to become law, co-authored by our esteemed former chairman Henry Hyde and Tom Lantos, was enacted in September of 2002. The lack of authorities in the intervening years has eroded Congress's foreign policy leverage with the Department of State. By enacting this bill, Congress will repair this lapse, strengthen our foreign policy oversight, and fulfill our obligation to the American public. The text authorizes basic operations for the State Department, the Broadcasting Board of Governors, and the Peace Corps at fiscally responsible levels coordinated with the Appropriations Committee. This bill does not include any foreign aid authorities. H.R. 6018 contains important management reforms to increase the efficiency, the accountability, and the safety of our personnel overseas. It reflects bipartisan concern that Congress needs to have a stronger oversight role in the State Department's expanding activities to promote cybersecurity with other governments around the world. It establishes important jurisdiction and oversight authority for the Department's Strategic Counterterrorism Communications Center, which is already operational. By maintaining current funding for independent audits, inspections, and investigations of the State Department and the Peace Corps, H.R. 6018 ensures that, while we are tightening our belts, we will continue to ferret out waste, fraud, and abuse on behalf of the American taxpayer. This bill will help American businesses by removing unreasonable obstacles and streamlining the arms control process by exporting selected equipment and parts. At the same time, it will enhance U.S. security by increasing safeguards against the transfer of sensitive U.S. technologies to state sponsors of terrorism, to China, and to other countries subject to U.S. arms embargoes. For all of these reasons, Mr. Speaker, H.R. 6018 deserves the bipartisan support that it has received so far and passage by the House this evening. With that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of our time.
Gentlelady reserves her time. Gentleman from California.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of S-2165. No, I don't. I do that later. This time I rise in support of the Fiscal Year 2013 Foreign Relations Authorization Act. Mr. Speaker, this bill establishes the basis for our embassies to function and our diplomats to promote U.S. national interests around the world. It provides some of the authorities and resources our State Department needs to promote peaceful international cooperation, protect U.S. national security, and demonstrate the values and principles that define us as a nation. All around the world, our foreign and civil service officers operate on the front lines of the fight against global terrorism, putting their lives at risk to protect the lives of innocents. By shortchanging our diplomats, we only increase the likelihood of armed confrontation. Skillful diplomacy is also essential for opening foreign markets to American goods and services, which promotes economic growth and creates jobs here at home. On balance, I do support this bill. It's not perfect. The authorization numbers are well below the fiscal year 13 requested levels, lower than what I think is needed to exert strong and effective global leadership. And in a perfect world, I would have preferred a more comprehensive bill that authorizes the full range of our global activities. But the distinguished chairman and her staff have worked with us diligently over the past few weeks to make the changes necessary to arrive at a text that we can wholeheartedly support. So I thank the chairman for her hard work on the bill and for the comity and respect she demonstrated throughout the process, and I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. Gentlelady from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have no further requests for time, so when the gentleman yields back, I'll make some closing statements and yield back as well.
Does the gentleman yield back?
Yes, consider my opening to be my closing, and I yield back.
Gentleman from California yields back his time. Gentlelady from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will yield myself such time as I may consume. And in closing, thank you, sir. I'd like to thank all of the members who have worked with us to help put the State Department back on the books for the first time in a decade. I want to thank also the Appropriations, the Budget, the Intelligence Committees for their helpful consultations throughout this process. And finally, and most especially, I want to thank the ranking member, my good friend from California, Mr. Berman. He has dedicated so many hours, both he and his staff, in making this important bill possible, and I thank him for that. And in particular, I'd like to thank Rick Kessler, Doug Campbell, Daniel Silverberg, Shanna Winters, David Feit, Diana Obam, Brent Woolfolk, Daniel Harsha, and our esteemed staff director, Dr. Yolande Poblet, and indeed all of our hardworking Foreign Affairs staff for their expert assistance, and as well as Doug Anderson and Jamie McCormick. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I urge adoption of the bill. Yield back the balance of our time.
Generally yields back her time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 6018 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion, Chair.
Mr. Speaker, on that I request the yeas and nays.
In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative. The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. Sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20. Further proceedings on the question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and pass Senate Bill 2165.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
Senate 2165. An act to enhance strategic cooperation between the United States and Israel and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Ross Layton, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Berman, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Florida.
I thank the Speaker. I ask unanimous consent, Mr. Speaker, that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on Senate Bill 2165.
Without objection.
Thank you, sir. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I appreciate it, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of the United States-Israel Enhanced Security Cooperation Act of 2012. I would like to thank the distinguished Majority Leader and the Minority Whip, Mr. Cantor and Mr. Hoyer, for sponsoring the House version of this legislation, as well as Senators Boxer and Isaacson, who sponsored the Senate version that this House is considering today. For over 64 years, since the United States recognized Israel just 11 minutes after its creation, the democratic Jewish state of Israel has been one of our closest allies. Our shared commitment to peace and to freedom have been the foundation of a special bond that has reinforced the safety and the security of both of our countries. We have forged a defense partnership that has yielded advanced technologies and policies that have benefited both of our nations and helped to keep our citizens secure. Our fates are tied together a threat to one of our countries is a threat to both. And so, as the Iranian regime continues to race toward nuclear weapons and sponsor violent extremists like Hamas and Hezbollah, we must work together to counter this growing threat, Mr. Speaker. And while the United States and Israel are targeted by many of the same threats, Israel's proximity to the Iran-Syria, Hamas, Hezbollah nexus leaves us no room for error. Our goal with this legislation is to ensure that Israel has the ability to protect its citizens against the dangers that touch their lives every day, against the rockets, against the bombs, against the missiles that their enemies stockpile while making well-publicized threats every day against the Jewish state. And how do we achieve this goal, Mr. Speaker? By increasing the totality of our bilateral security relations. That means increasing joint missile defense systems, joint military exercise, and intelligence cooperation. We get to learn from them, and they get to learn from us. And we all sleep a little more soundly knowing that we have done all we can to help our citizens. It also means providing increased excess defense articles and munitions to Israel. With a host of entities stirring the pot of hostility against the Jewish state, it is critical that the United States stand foursquare with Israel. This legislation also extends the authority to provide loan guarantees to the Israeli government that provides the Jewish state with a cushion of support in times of need and at no cost to the American taxpayer. Mr. Speaker, our ally Israel needs our help, and we are situated to lend a friend this hand while strengthening our own security in the process. Let us stand together today and say that we support a strong and secure Israel, not only because Israel is our friend and ally, but also because a strong and secure Israel means a strong and secure America. Now is a particularly important time to send that message as we face the looming specter of this sequester that we're all talking about and working hard to prevent. Mr. Speaker, if nothing is done to avert this crisis, we will face an almost $450 million cut to security assistance to Israel. This would include over $100 million in cuts to cooperative missile defense programs. These cuts would damage the security of our nation and our ally Israel, and they must be averted. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I'm so pleased to yield such time as he may consume to the co-author of this legislation, our leader, Mr. Cantor, for as much time as he may consume.
Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
I thank the Speaker, and I thank the gentlelady from Florida for her leadership on this issue. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of the U.S.-Israel Enhanced Security Cooperation Act. As the gentlelady just said, Mr. Speaker, I, together with my counterpart, Steny Hoyer, Chairman Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, the gentleman from California, Ranking Member Howard Berman, in May, introduced this bill, and the House passed it with nearly unanimous support. At a time when we are facing huge fiscal challenges, this bill makes it clear that no matter what, the United States always stands strong in our support for Israel, with whom we share a commitment to freedom, a respect for human life, and a commitment to security. Among other things, this bill allows for the continuation of long-standing loan guarantees to Israel. We restate the importance of maintaining Israel's qualitative military edge, and we improve military and intelligence cooperation, particularly with respect to joint missile defense. We also reiterate our commitment to stand with Israel in international forums like the United Nations, where Israel often finds itself in an unfriendly environment. And, Mr. Speaker, we encourage NATO to welcome an expanded role for Israel. Our investment in Israel's security is an investment in American security. Beyond this bipartisan expression of America's support for Israel, there is much the United States can do to protect our interests and the interests of our closest allies in the Middle East. But we cannot do so as a spectator. The U.S. must lead. We cannot rely on Vladimir Putin and Kofi Annan to broker the peace in Syria, or stand idly by as Iran and Russia protect Bashar Assad, one of the world's most active state sponsors of terrorism. And we cannot and must not allow Iran to acquire nuclear weapons capability. Mr. Speaker, we must meet the existential threat Iran poses to Israel, its neighbors, and the world with strength and engagement. We cannot allow situations in the region to unfold without our leadership. In fact, during my recent trips to the region, I have found there is more agreement on the need for U.S. leadership than anything else. Today, Mr. Speaker, the House will send this bipartisan bill to the President and deliver the message that during this pivotal and dangerous period in the Middle East, the United States stands tall for our ally Israel. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time.
Reserve the balance of our time.
Gentlelady reserves. Gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong support of S-2165, the United States-Israel Enhanced Security Cooperation Act of 2012. Yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
I want to thank, first of all, my friends Majority Leader Cantor and Minority Whip Hoyer for bringing this important bill back to the floor of the House so that we can accept the Senate's constructive additions and send it to the President's desk. I'd also like to thank, as did my chairman, Senators Boxer and Isaacson and Senator Collins for their leadership on this resolution in the Senate. And finally, I would like to thank my friend and chairman, the gentlelady from Florida, for her continued leadership on the issue of the U.S.-Israel relationship. Members should recall that in May we passed the House version of this bill, H.R. 4133, by a near-unanimous vote. We will be taking another vote today because the Senate has added an important extension of military stockpile reserve authorities. I strongly support this addition and thank the Senate for its contribution. Mr. Speaker, since its founding, Israel has faced innumerable challenges to its survival, but the serious threats it faces today are unprecedented. Deadly cross-border attacks from the Sinai Peninsula have taken both Israeli Arab and Israeli Jewish lives. Terrorism still penetrates Israel from Gaza in the form of rocket and mortar attacks. But unlike in years past, the Iron Dome anti-missile system, funded in part by the United States, has changed the rules of the game. In fact, Iron Dome has been successful in intercepting a remarkable 90% of incoming rockets aimed at once defenseless population centers. Currently, there are only a handful of Iron Dome batteries operational in Israel. More are needed in order to protect all of Israel's 8 million citizens. I'm pleased to say that S-2165 retains language from the Iron Dome Support Act, bipartisan legislation I introduced, which now has nearly 110 co-sponsors, expressing support for providing Israel assistance to produce additional Iron Dome batteries. This bill also pledges to assist Israel with its ongoing efforts to forge a peaceful, negotiated settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that results in two states living side by side in peace and in security. Despite all the obstacles to achieving this goal, we cannot give up trying, as peace is profoundly in Israel's strategic interest. I applaud Prime Minister Netanyahu's willingness to negotiate anywhere, anytime. The Palestinians should take him up on that offer instead of pursuing a campaign to delegitimize Israel at the UN and elsewhere. Mr. Speaker, perhaps the greatest threat to both American and Israeli security today is that posed by Iran's nuclear weapons program. I hope this problem can be solved diplomatically. But as we all know, only massive pressure from the United States and our allies has any chance of persuading Iran to give up its quest for nuclear arms. In fact, we are currently negotiating a sanctions bill with the Senate, the Iran Threat Reduction Act, which Chairman Ross Layton and I introduced and which the House passed late last year. That bill will dramatically increase the economic pressure on Iran. Meanwhile, the bill before us today makes clear that the U.S. Congress will continue to help Israel meet the Iranian threat. Gaza-based terrorism, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and the Iranian nuclear program are not the only threats faced by Israel. Recent events in Egypt and Syria, along with the presence of Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon, require Israeli vigilance against danger from all directions. To that end, this bill once again reaffirms our determination to support Israel's qualitative military edge against any possible combination of regional threats. And reinforcing that commitment to Israel's security, this bill extends for 4 years a loan guarantee program for Israel that was initiated in 2003. The extension is based on legislation that Chairman Ross Layton and I introduced in March. Mr. Speaker, our relationship with our ally Israel is one of the most important and closest that we have with any nation in the world. The United States and Israel face many of the same threats, and we share the same values. Israel's Defense Minister Ehud Barak recently said that he can hardly remember a better period of U.S. support and cooperation, and I quote, and common U.S.-Israel strategic understanding than the current one. Passage of this bill will help ensure that this cooperation continues into the future. I encourage all of my colleagues to support this legislation. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. Gentlelady from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm so pleased to yield 4 minutes to my good friend, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Smith, who is the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Africa, Global Health, and Human Rights.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 4 minutes.
Speaker, I thank the distinguished gentlelady, the chairwoman of our committee, for her great leadership in the defense of Israel, as well as my good friend and colleague, the ranking member, Mr. Berman. These two individuals work hard every day for the peace and security of our friend and ally, Israel. This is a must-pass bill, Mr. Speaker, as we must reiterate our support for the nation of Israel. Our friend and ally, Israel, lives under the daily threat of indiscriminate rocket attacks on their homes and businesses, terrorism on public transit, and the unapologetic, undeterred, and unacceptable existential threat of a nuclear Iran. Despite Iran's signature to the Genocide Convention of 1956, Iran's anti-Semitic leader Ahmadinejad has repeatedly threatened to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. Iran has ignored its commitments not to pursue nuclear weapons under the IAEA, refusing inspections and failing the ones they do allow. The UN has failed to be resolute in its response to Iran or to protect Israel, leaving Israel to fend for itself at best, but more often attacking and undermining it at every opportunity. Most recently and amazingly, the United Nations allowed Iran to be elected to the 15-member General Committee of the UN Arms Trade Treaty Conference, which is allegedly developing a treaty regulating the international sale of conventional arms. Iran does, after all, have considerable experience in this area. Iran has been arming Israel's neighbors for decades. Freedom House's annual report on the world, which assesses the political and civil liberties of every nation on earth, shows that Israel is surrounded by nations that profoundly disrespect the political and civil liberties of their own citizens. These nations actively foment hate against Israel and have human rights records that are among the worst in the world. Syria has now shown its true colors. We cannot sit by and wait for Iran to have the opportunity. Mr. Speaker, superior deterrence remains among the best guarantors of peace, and that has certainly been the case in the Middle East. S-2165 enhances Israel's ability to defend itself. When Israel's military superiority was unclear in the eyes of its enemies, soon after it was created, Israel was tested repeatedly with war, and yet they won again and again. In response to Israel's clear military superiority, Israel's enemies have relied on cowardly acts of terrorism. They have attacked with Gaza rockets, with the Intifada, with the flotilla, and Israel's task has been to overcome those deadly aggressions. Mr. Speaker, S-2165 provides assistance for several programs that are effective in deterring attack and defending Israel, including for the Iron Dome, Israel's successful means of defending itself against missiles and rockets targeting Israeli homes and businesses. With this bill, Israel will be better equipped for any scenario as it fulfills its solemn duty to protect its own people. With this bill, we also reassert our country's moral obligation and unshakable commitment to give Israel every assistance. The U.S. reaffirms in word and in deed our dedication to the defense of the Jewish state. S-2165 expands U.S. military intelligence and civilian cooperation with Israel, including an offer to the Israeli Air Force for adding additional training opportunities in the U.S. to compensate for Israel's limited airspace and other enhanced cooperation on intelligence sharing. Israel has shown itself to be a great friend of the United States, not only setting the standard for democracy and human rights in the region, but by being trustworthy with loans, always repaying loans on time and in full. This bill recognizes Israel's dependability with an extension of the long-standing loan guarantee program for Israel. Finally, the bill reaffirms that the only viable option for peace and security in the region is an Israeli state and a Palestinian state existing side by side. Mohammed, again, I ask for members to support this important bill, and I thank the gentlelady for yielding.
Thank you, sir.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlewoman reserves the balance of her time. Gentleman from California.
Yes, I'm very pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentleman representing American Samoa and the ranking Democrat on the Asia and Pacific Islands Subcommittee of the Foreign Affairs
Gentleman's
Committee.
recognized.
Mr. Vali Mavenga.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to extend and revise my remarks.
Without objection to order.
Mr. Speaker, I want to associate myself, especially with the remarks made by the gentlelady from Florida, our distinguished chairwoman of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, and my senior ranking member, the gentleman from California, Mr. Berman, for their leadership in bringing this legislation before the body, our members, for consideration and approval. I think there is absolutely no question in terms of the provisions provided in this bill. We want to be absolutely certain that our government is in no way any less in terms of our efforts to make sure that the security of the State of Israel is assured. And I want to commend again the gentlelady from Florida and also my good friend from New Jersey, Mr. Smith, for their comments in assuring and giving every absolute notice to countries of the world know where the United States stands as far as its defense of Israel. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California reserves the balance of his time. Reserves the balance of his time. Gentlewoman from Florida.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I'm so pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Shabbat, who is the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Middle East and South Asia and deals with these issues every day.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I really do appreciate the great leadership that Chairwoman Ros-Lehtinen has presented on this issue and so many issues around the world, as well as Mr. Berman, the ranking member. Both of them together in a bipartisan manner have really done a great job, I think, for our country, and we appreciate that. Despite the tremendous progress that's been made toward ensuring Israel's continued security, critical challenges still remain. Now, perhaps more than at any time since the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Israel faces real and direct threats to its very homeland. Although the so-called Arab Spring has raised hopes that with time and hard work, democracy may take hold in Arab lands, it's also ushered what will no doubt be a period of profound and prolonged instability. And while we most certainly should be working with Arab countries in this time of transition, we must not forget Israel, the Middle East's only established democracy and our friend and ally, which faces unprecedented threats to its security. Some of these are threats that Israel has not had to deal with in a very long time. To the west, Israel faces new and untested Egyptian leadership, which has sent some troubling messages about its intentions for Egyptian-Israeli bilateral relations. To the north, fighting in Syria is continuing to intensify, and all signs suggest that the country may collapse into full-scale civil war. Other threats are sadly perennial. To Israel's north and west, terrorists remain poised to attack and otherwise disrupt normal life for millions of Israeli citizens. To the east, the Iranian threat looms large on the horizon, and they threaten Israel and the entire region with the prospect of a nuclear weapons-capable radical regime right next door. There is no question that the illicit Iranian nuclear program must remain at the very top of our priority list. It certainly is the top of Israel's priority list. The nuclear program is, however, a symptom of the disease rather than the disease itself. The nuclear program is a paramount challenge to U.S. core national security interests as well as those of our allies, and it must be addressed. And as long as this regime is in power and the region continues to experience the kind of instability we are now witnessing, we must commit ourselves fully to doing everything we can to help aid Israel in securing itself. I urge the adoption of this very important resolution, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back.
We reserve the balance of our time, Mr. Speaker.
Gentlewoman reserves.
Thank you.
Gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, could you give me the remaining time on each side?
Gentleman from California has 13.5 minutes, and the gentlewoman from Florida 5.5 minutes.
I'm very pleased to yield to our distinguished whip 5 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Again, as I do repeatedly when I rise to speak on issues related to our closest ally in the Middle East, Israel, and the relationship between our two countries, to congratulate the chairwoman of the committee, the gentlelady from Florida, Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, for her leadership on this issue and focus on the importance not only of the relationship but on the importance of making sure that Israel is strong and able to defend herself. And also to congratulate the gentleman from California, Mr. Berman. I don't know anybody who for a longer period of time has focused on the issue of keeping the relationship between Israel and the United States strong, vibrant, and open, and who has on this floor, in committee, and in our caucus and around this country, educated people any more than he has to the necessity to keep this relationship strong and to keep Israel strong. So I rise to thank both of them for bringing this issue to the floor. Mr. Speaker, I was proud to co-sponsor this legislation with my friend, the Majority Leader, Mr. Cantor. That piece of legislation, which Ms. Lehtinen and Mr. Berman brought to the floor some months ago, passed here with a vote of 411 to 2, showing the overwhelming bipartisan support this issue has. This is clearly an issue, unlike so many that we deal with, that enjoys not only bipartisan support between the two parties, but support of philosophical perspectives from all over this caucus and this country. We don't always see eye to eye on matters of policy, but we always find common ground when it comes to strengthening the U.S.-Israel relationship. This is the case for two very important reasons. First, because the United States and Israel are linked by history and by the common glue of shared values: democracy, free enterprise, respect for human rights, and the rule of law. Secondly, because a strong Israel is in America's national security interest. Now, we make that point almost every time we speak because it's important for all of our constituents, our fellow Americans, to understand that the investment that we make in Israel, the investment in terms of time, in terms of support, in terms of finances, in terms of military assistance, are all in the interest of the United States of America and its citizens. Yes, it is to Israel's benefit as well, but primarily the United States acts because it sees as critical to its own interests the safety, security, and sovereignty of Israel. Military and security ties with Israel help the Pentagon and our intelligence agencies track threats to Americans at home and abroad, and they enable us to partner on the development of technologies that help keep our people safe. The #1 regional threat, of course, as all of us know, is the prospect of a nuclear Iran. That is of great concern to every nation in the world. The non-proliferation of nuclear weapons is a principal tenet of the nations of the world, adopted by the United Nations and adopted in treaties. Iran must not be allowed to obtain nuclear weapons, as it would dramatically destabilize the region, and Iran's leaders have already threatened American targets in that part of the world. Again, it's important to note that there are some 250,000 Americans within the range of Iranian missiles. And of course, there are untold economic interests of the United States and of the international community. Enhanced security cooperation with Israel is one of the many tools we have to help prevent Iran from achieving nuclear weaponization and to protect American assets in the region. This bill strengthens that cooperation in several ways. It authorizes aid for the joint U.S.-Israel Iron Dome missile defense, a critical investment. May I have another?
The gentleman an additional 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized.
It increases U.S. strategic stockpiles in Israel and provides Israel with additional weaponry, again, as a first line of defense for the United States as well as for Israel. Furthermore, this bill extends loan guarantees for Israel and encourages an expanded Israeli role in NATO. Mr. Speaker, it is so encouraging to see that even while we may divide on other matters, this House will pass the legislation before us with strong, overwhelming bipartisan support. That sends a message that hopefully cannot be missed. A clarity of purpose expressed by this Congress, the policy-making body of this nation, that speaks for all the people of our nation. Hopefully, those who would pose a threat and risk to us and to our allies would take note of that unanimity of purpose. Let us continue to ensure that close U.S.-Israel ties are an issue that unites us as Americans. As I said, the House overwhelmingly passed this measure earlier this year, 411 to 2. And now the Senate has sent it back to us for final consideration. I congratulate my friend Senator Boxer and the Republican leadership of the House, of the Senate as well. I hope we can pass it again today. I know we will. And I hope it's with even greater support. And I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this bill for America, for Israel, for international security. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California reserves the balance of his time. Gentlewoman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I only have some closing remarks and have no further requests for time, so I will wait for Mr. Berman to yield back.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
After what we just heard, I would not suggest any further speakers, and we're prepared to yield back for the balance of our time.
Gentleman from California yields back. Gentlewoman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will close with this, these closing remarks, so I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
I thank the Speaker. The United States-Israel Enhanced Security Cooperation Act of 2012 states, and it makes it very clear that U.S. policy is to, 1, reaffirm the commitment of Israel's security as a Jewish state, Also, to provide Israel with the military capabilities to defend herself and help preserve its qualitative military edge. Also, to expand military and civilian cooperation and to assist in negotiated settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that results in two states living side by side in peace and security, which is all of our goals, and also encourages Israel's neighbors to recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. This bill expresses the sense of Congress that the United States should take specified actions to assist in the defense of Israel. It amends the 2005 Department of Defense Appropriations Act to extend authority to transfer certain Department of Defense items to Israel, and it amends the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961 to extend authority to make additions to foreign-based defense stockpiles, and lastly, it amends the Emergency Wartime Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2003 to extend specified loan guarantee authority to Israel. This is in the U.S. national security interest, and I hope that the House overwhelmingly passes this important bill. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of our time.
Gentlewoman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Senate Bill 2165? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. What purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask that the House suspend the rules and pass Senate Bill 2009.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Senate 2009. An act to improve the administration of programs in the insular areas and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Ross-Leighton, and the gentleman from American Samoa, Mr. Faleomavega, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Florida.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material on Senate Bill 2009.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
I thank the Speaker. I rise in support of Senate Bill 2009, the Insular Areas Act, a brief bill that passed the Senate unanimously in December before being transmitted to the House and referred to multiple committees. The bill consists of 3 short sections. The first section, which shifts to the Department of Energy the responsibility for Department of Interior-funded radiological monitoring at former U.S. nuclear test sites, has long been overseen by the Committee on Natural Resources. The second section, which confirms the continuing eligibility of U.S. magistrates to participate in long-standing judicial exchange programs, is primarily overseen by the Committee on the Judiciary. And the third section, involving a domestic workforce issue, is overseen by the Committee on Education and the Workforce. All of these committees have reviewed the bill, waived additional action, and consented to today's suspension consideration of the bill. I want to thank those committees for their consideration and their input, and at this point I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the letters from the Chairman of Judiciary, Mr. Smith, the Chairman of the Education and Workforce Committee, Chairman Klein, on this bill.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and with that I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman reserves the balance of her time. Gentleman from American Samoa.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, and I want to express my deepest appreciation to the gentlelady from Florida, Chairman of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, and certainly my colleague, our senior ranking member on the committee, Mr. Berman from California. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to extend and revise my remarks. I also ask unanimous consent that the full text of my statement be made part of the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Also a statement with reference to the people of Eniwetok, where this dome, the Ruined Dome, is located. I'd like to add that also to be made part of the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, at this time I would like to express my most sincere appreciation to our Speaker of the House, John Boehner, our Majority Leader, Mr. Eric Cantor, our Democratic Leader, Nancy Pelosi, our Democratic Whip, Steny Hoyer, Chairman of our Foreign Affairs Committee, Ms. Ross Layton, and Mr. Berman from California, Chairman John Klein and Ranking Member George Miller of the Committee on Education and Workforce, Chairman Lamar Smith and Ranking Member John Conyers of the Committee on Judiciary, Chairman Doc Hastings and Ranking Member Ed Markey of the Committee on Natural Resources, and certainly Senator Jeff Bingaman and Senator Lisa Murkowski, who respectively served as Chairman and Ranking Member of the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources for all that they have done on behalf of the insular areas. I cannot thank my colleagues enough for standing with me because I know that passage of this bill is only possible today due to their support. I also thank the committee and the staff leadership for their working so close association with my Office of the Provision which will benefit the Associated States of Micronesia, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, and the Territory of American Samoa. Mr. Speaker, as my chairman had alluded to earlier about the section, it's very simple. This atoll, Runit Atoll, which is located on Enewetak, for the benefit and information of my colleagues, Enewetak Atoll is located in the Marshall Islands. This is where we exploded 43 of our nuclear bombs out of the 67 nuclear bombs that we exploded during our testing program from 1943 to 1962. And in the process, this is where we exploded our mini hydrogen bomb that was called the Mike Shot, which was only about 700 times more powerful than the nuclear bomb that we exploded in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Only about a couple of hundred miles away is also the atoll called Bikini Atoll. And in 1954, we exploded the most powerful and the first hydrogen bomb that was ever exploded in this planet. It was known as the Bravo Shot. And it was 1,300 times more powerful than the bombs that we dropped in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Just to give my colleagues a sense of understanding and appreciating what we did in this specific atoll, Enewetak, we had to collect all the debris, all the nuclear waste materials that we've done as a result of the 43 bombs that we exploded in this atoll for purposes of preventing nuclear contamination from getting into the water, the ocean, and all of that. Well, it's starting to leak. And there's some very serious problems with nuclear contamination, seepage coming out of what we've done in burying supposedly this nuclear waste materials on this atoll called Runit Atoll. And this provision is just simply the Congress directs the Secretary of Energy to do a monitoring program and to see what is happening after some 40 years that we did all this tremendous damage, not only to property but to the lives of these people in the Marshall Islands. This is what this provision provides. Very simply, authorize the Secretary of Energy, go over there, find out what's going on, and make sure that the underground water, so that these people can survive properly. And in the process, and what's good about this bill, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Speaker, is that it doesn't require any offsets. We don't have to worry about any financial. It will be funded by the technical assistance program that is now provided by the Office of Insular Affairs. The second provision in this bill, Mr. Speaker, it just simply amends the Compact of Free Association to authorize our judges to go there and serve temporarily in the courts of these Associated States of Micronesia. That's all it does. Doesn't require any more expense than it is, but just to simply authorize them. And the third provision that I want to share with my colleagues is simply to delay the increase of the minimum wage in my little territory of American Samoa for the next 3 years. That's all that this bill provides, Mr. Chairman. And as I said, Mr. Speaker, this is one of the most unusual bills. It has the support of 4 committee chairmen and senior ranking members. Now, you talk about bipartisanship. I don't know of any other bill that I've ever heard or known the fact that we have something that we can all work towards in solving some of the serious problems affecting the lives of our fellow Americans. And that's all I'm asking for. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman
No
from
further
Florida.
requests for time, so I will continue to reserve.
Gentlewoman reserves.
My time back, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from American Samoa yields back his time. The gentlewoman from
Thank
Florida.
you. I yield myself such time as I may consume. And Mr. Speaker, I want to congratulate Mr. Faloma Vega for the warm way in which he works with every member of our committee, and that is why it is a pleasure for all of us on the Committee on Foreign Affairs to do everything that we can to help the gentleman because we know how important these bills are to him. As we can see, as we have heard, what we may consider to be a suspension bill that will not impact our daily lives, it impacts the many thousands of people whom he is so proud to represent in a very real and meaningful way. So I thank him for his gentle manners. I thank him for his graciousness. I thank him for the bills, the important bills that he brings to our attention, and I want to tell him what an honor it is for all of us in our committee to work with him in a bipartisan way. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of our time.
The gentlewoman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Senate Bill 2009? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds. Gentlewoman from Florida.
Mr. Speaker, on that I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted.